Hello everyone, I hope you're enjoying the Cancer season. I wanted to talk today about the esoteric or occult function of the menstrual cycle, which is quite appropriate given that we are in the season of the mother and of the moon. So we know that the moon for a very long time has corresponded to the waters, including the rhythms of the female uterus and the menstruation cycle. And this very instinctual understanding and impression goes way back, of course, into deep primitive forms of consciousness. In fact, I was speaking to my analyst about this subject matter, and she spoke about the blood mysteries and how in very old primitive cultures, societies, more like tribal consciousness, I guess, of course, they didn't have a rational understanding as to why the blood happened, right? There wasn't an understanding also of how conception happened, and all that the people were impressed by was the fact that a woman would bleed with the lunar cycle, and then all of a sudden the blood would stop, and then that would be the indication of a baby growing. And so there's a very old, deep psychic thought form that goes way back to a really deep place of in our psyches, where there's an association with the blood and the life force. And this dark yin energy, of course, is what has been really deeply severed from our collective psyche in our post-rational state, and in the hyper-masculine state, which has individuated itself so far away and quite violently away from this feminine instinctual consciousness, in part due to a fear of it. And the men during those times as well would have been like, what is this strange thing that the woman's body does? It's so foreign to a man, this internal process of creation. Whereas the more yang energy is much more overt and obvious and external in nature, whereas the yin energy is internal. So this internal process of the growth of life and the ending of life, we also see this connection to the symbolism of the snake, which sheds its skin, and the shedding of the moon's skin, metaphorically speaking, where there's this waxing and waning. And so we have here these themes of instinct, which of course in the Jungian pantheon is very much connected to instinct. If we dream of snakes, you have to work out what the message is, but often there's something in the instinctual realm that is trying to get at you. If a snake is chasing you, that can be scary, but it means something in the instinct is trying to get to you. Or if it's a more poetic expression, let's say a snake spiraled around a tree, that's a very regenerating, life-affirming kind of symbol there. But this connection to the instinct, the Ouroboros energy, the moon with its fading in and out of these cycles like this. Esoterically, we know that the moon doesn't have a radiatory influence from this esoteric perspective, right? Yes, there's a ray attributed to it, but the fourth ray connection to the moon we can already get a sense of just with what we've just been discussing, where the fourth ray is this psychological ray of the regeneration of forms. There's the tug and the push and the pull, and the waxing and the waning, and in its best case scenario, it is the transformation of astral energy. Now, this is taking us into the understanding of what the menstrual cycle does. And that is the emptying out, the internal purification of the astral sphere. This is the great mystery and the great power of the lunar cycle and of the woman's body and the function of the uterus. Coming back to the moon, esoterically, yes, it doesn't have a radiatory influence, but it's an old reflection of all of that's been accumulated in the past, which needs to be regenerated. And we can understand and appreciate, particularly again through this just explanation we've been exploring with the emptying out of forms, why it veils occultly, why the moon veils a planet, because the idea would be when we've passed through and regenerated like a snake, shedding those layers of the skin, emptying out all of the old emotional energies, that something else emerges. So I have sometimes gotten an impression from people on occasion that they kind of project almost something onto the teachings, where they think that the attitude towards the moon is somehow an anti-feminine statement. But it's not. It's not at all, because and I think this is something that I'm taking from Philip now, but I think he described the moon as being a satellite for the Earth. So even though we've got this old connection to the moon as mother that goes way back into our instinctual collective psyche, we could say the true mother, or that intelligence of the earthly feminine, is really contained within the earth. But the moon brings about that wisdom of the regenerating cycles. And that is the best case scenario for the moon when we're working with it in its psychological function, in its regenerating function. The moon falls in the sign of Scorpio. That is to say that the matter principle falls and is disintegrated or dies in the sign of discipleship, in the psychological fourth ray sign of Scorpio, which is a death sign and a regenerative sign. So substance, the moon, goes down into the 7 astral subplanes. Consciousness goes down, 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 that in the case of the disciple. And that this is where we get sometimes these Kundalini type experiences. Not that the Kundalini is specifically associated with the moon, but it's more like the emptying out all the way down, going through these plutonic initiations. And I've heard people connect Pluto sometimes to the Kundalini experience, because it's getting us all the way down to the bottom. It hollows us out, it empties us out, it regenerates and allows for the fertile ground to be accessed and for something new to come forward, which is why Uranus, as this planet of spirit and of the future, is exalted in Scorpio. Form degenerates and regenerates, then we have the rising of the phoenix. This fluidity and flexibility that comes innately with the female physiology is why, for a woman, her capacity for realization spiritually tends to actually be a little bit greater than a man's. Now, just be careful about making any snap judgments from what I've said there. Most of my audience, I think, at this stage is male, or it skews slightly male, rather. There are plenty of very intuitive men who have good relationship with the feminine, but it's a necessary understanding of how it's a macrocosm, microcosm thing. So just as the yang principle is that which externalizes or comes out or is penetrative, we see that reflected in the superior physiology of the male in his strength. And of course, a woman can get very, very, very strong, but no matter how many push-ups or how much of a masterful shot putter the woman is, her upper body strength is never going to be anywhere near close to that of a man's. And so necessarily there has to be an equalizing force or counterbalance. And so where man has the superior external strength, woman has a superior internal strength. Obviously, she has to give birth. Right? There's a complete internal, like that lived experience of the physiology of childbirth is that example of that. And so if yang is also the ultimate like creative life principle in that externalizing way, the feminine principle is this internalizing. Yes, there's a creational life principle there as well. And we see that when a woman ovulates, there's a spike in testosterone during that period as well. So even in that phase, there's a slight yang element to that. But the yin is really that dying out process, or that real introverted emptying out, which is what happens during the death aspect of the menstrual cycle as well. So, okay, so many women, I mean, all women menstruate unless there's certain complications that go on. But many women, let's say in the collective, don't necessarily have this very attuned relationship to this function of the menstrual cycle with its astral purificatory capacity or potentiality. We call it PMS. Like if you get moody just before you're about to bleed, then that's just a matter of PMS. But I can say that when the soul came online and when there was a whole bunch of these regenerative processes that got stimulated and consciousness was going through a massive evolution and doing all of these things, then the function of the menstrual cycle changed, and my relationship to it changed, and it's the intensity of it changed. I never had problematic periods, and still don't, but that prior to the emptying out, where the cycle begins, and it begins with the when menstruation starts. Prior to that, like all of that leading up to the emptying out, those would be very intense. And what eventually started to happen was that the people I was close to would also experience an astral purge at this time. So here's a real mystery here with the way in which the collective astral field can get passed through the womb. It's important that we come to understand what this process is, because the great problem is the astral body and our inability to release, let go, and regenerate. So this intimacy with the menstrual cycle has to come into being at a certain point. Now, coming back to what I just said about the uterus being a portal for the death of a collective space, potentially with multiple people. I've experienced that here with the people I'm with. I've experienced that with my husband. It's not every month, but when there is a certain degree of intensity or processes that have gone on in the prior month, then it'll happen. And usually at that point I can feel it takes a little bit more effort for the body to release, and there's usually a very internal rubbing down quality that has to happen, and you can feel it in the space. Everything starts to get a bit sluggish, and everyone starts to feel it in some way, whether it's headachy or fatigue and all of this. So it makes you think about what is the potentiality of the regenerating of astral energies when people start operating in a way that's more aligned with nature. We know that there are some tribal instinctual cultures where the women would go off together during the menstruation cycle. And so what were they doing, and what was the function? They were way more in relationship to that. So as our culture has become hypermental and divorced from that instinctuality, we've lost, and women in particular, although everyone suffers as a result for obvious reasons, but women in particular have lost that potency and maturity and groundedness in their own feminine essence through that internal initiatory process that goes on through her physiology. So that matter in that way initiates the woman. Of course, it's the same case for men, but the masculine way is a little bit more about the going out and the tackling of the problems. A woman can go through those things too, because necessarily if you're going through any kind of yang creative process, an externalization process, building a business or writing a book, whatever it is, there's necessarily a getting out and interfacing with the limits of the great archetypal mother that we come up in that way. But this internal yin process is a going down through this dark vortex, this black hole energy. So it's quite frightening for the Western mind and the Western psyche, which has an emphasis on consciousness and logos and the knowing and understanding from a rational perspective. Whereas when we get to a point where we have to relate to these death processes in the yin sense, it's a completely different direction that consciousness goes in and down through. I've written a lot about the sign Cancer. You can see it on my posts on my Facebook page, on my Instagram, because this relationship with the Dark Mother, in that way, they're going down and into the black hole or the waters. It's a sinking down of consciousness. Cancer is this sign of diffusion. And we think about in Gemini, which is the sign before, there's a sort of vitality and movement, and then the oceans of substance. And then out of that emerging into Leo, right, so that's the uterus or the mother principle that births the Christ child. Okay, but this direction of consciousness, yeah, if you've got a strong mind, where the Westerners in general have trouble with this, but then anyone who's got a strong mind, women included, and I myself am cerebral and have a strength of mind, which there are benefits to that and there are complications to that. But that which wants to go like this, which then has to go like this, and the diffusing out. And there are just different resources that we access when we are able to do that. And women, even if you are a heady woman or you've had trouble with instinctuality, if a woman has the consciousness and the will to go down there, her capacity to build relationship to that aspect of being is that much more easier for her than, let's say, a man with the same psychological challenges as her, simply because of her relationship to the uterus. There's just a portal into that, which is a little bit easier to access. So when we want to talk about the patriarchy as a negative thing, it's that fear that the masculine psyche has had towards these very mysterious, dark processes. And of course, the inversion of instinctual feminine power is that it can be, all of that which manipulates. And I've known men with negative mother complexes who are like that too. They're the spider that spins the web. We think about Lord of the Rings, where you've got the positive mother figure in a way through Galadriel, and she gives Frodo the little ball of the special liquid light thing, which, gets him out of a bad situation. So that's like the positive mother image, that which nourishes and sustains and can bring new life, versus the shadow of the instinctual mother, which is expressed through the spider. So that which does all of this. So, it's understandable why it's frightening, but it's the separation of consciousness that's happened from that instinctuality has also driven that aspect of the feminine kind of insane. And so it's that rule again that I've touched on so many times, where the more you turn away from something, the more it like becomes this grotesque thing. This is a very fourth ray process that we're talking about here. Think of Scorpio and like this is the balancing of the psychic opposites. So anything that you turn away from, let's say if you have a dream where the snake's coming after you, and at a time when I was the most disassociated from myself, at a really dark time in my life, I had a dream of a black mamba African snake, the most aggressive territorial snake. And they go up like really high and they will chase you. I had a dream with that snake coming after me. Needless to say, the instinctual realm of my own psyche was not happy with how far away my consciousness had gotten. And I even had 2 direct experiences with snakes in real life at that time. I was trying to go to a beach. There's a little bush path to the beach, and there was a red belly black, it's a native Australian snake, a little bit venomous, perfectly coiled in the path, staring right at me. Okay, backed away slowly. Okay, I know another path that I can go down to get to the beach. And what did I find there? Another snake in the exact same position. So that's an example of the Kundalini energy, let's say, or the instinctual feminine psychic life force that, I mean, it's a kind of cool story in terms of it being a synchronicity, but it was also an indication of how disassociated I was from myself at that time. So all of that power and potency was trying to get back to me, and I was so far away from it, in fact, that a concretized image actually showed up in the physical reality. So, we're talking about a lot of different things here now. So, but it's all part of this understanding the moon, the cycles of regeneration, the Cancerian mystery, that which takes us all the way down to the bottom so that we can build anew. We have a lot of difficulty relating to these yin processes in the Western psyche. We don't respect the yin processes. We think, we often judge these yin processes as being passive or non-productive, or you're doing nothing. But it's the art of doing nothing. It's the way in which nature does all of this for you, and consciousness, all it has to do is go down and really sit down there. So the other thing that women have to do with this too is to access this power, they have to actually get down inside their own uterus. So in terms of building the bridge and the pathway there, the consciousness has to relate to the sex organs. It's also true for men, relating to getting into the belly, getting into the balls, the genitals, just occupying that area. It's really difficult, but all of this negative stuff is down there, guys. It's our ancestral stuff, it's our whatever weird stuff we've picked up in relationship to the bodies. I've never had a disgust issue, but I can really see that on my husband's side. There's a certain a little bit of neuroticism around bodily processes a little bit. So sometimes those kinds of things can show up. Shame, so it's whether it's excessive or retracted direction. And then in the female organs in particular, getting into the ovaries. So even as I say that, most women can't even, if I say, can you feel your ovaries right now? They don't necessarily, they can't access that somatically in that moment. And that's part of the problem. So it's a matter of really getting in and occupying those spaces, really getting into the uterus being able to really merge. This is a tantric thing here too, merging your own consciousness so deep into the body. We have variations of this with body scan meditations or becoming aware of different aspects of the energy body. Bearing in mind too that I talk about accessing the heart first, just as a starting point from the outset. I find anyway, you can't really access those deeper layers of, let's say, the feminine psyche, as we're talking about it in this example, without the maturity of that heart. You just don't have the loving consciousness enough to be able to withstand or meet what's coming up. Of course, people do sometimes blast open some of the lower centers. We've talked about this before, and then you get all kinds of weird stuff, or so-called Kundalini awakenings, but really it's just kind of psychotic stuff that's coming up unmediated and undifferentiated from the subconscious. So it's not a good idea to try and drive open those centers. But in terms of the application of the love principle to your own substance, to your own body, and getting curious about, just as you do think about a relationship with someone, how is a relationship built? It's empathy, it's understanding. I ask questions, I'd be genuinely interested in you. You do that with the body. And so it's this process here. I think one of the interesting manifestations of our disconnection from this aspect in the West is, particularly in the United States, is the preoccupation with youth and the way in which women do a lot of stuff to try and maintain their youth. If women had that stronger center in themselves, they wouldn't be trying to fight nature so much. And the fact that we don't value the maturity of a postmenopausal woman, unfortunately, a lot of postmenopausal women in the West aren't really mature women because they haven't built a relationship with this instinctual part of themselves. But that is the true, the gift of aging, which is all of that instinctual wisdom that would otherwise come with a person's natural maturation and grounding into themselves if they weren't so dissociated and driven mad by the slightly over-concretized mental problem, which, coming back to the occult understanding of the epoch that we're in this development of the mind, but we've got the over-development of the concrete mind, which is partly why we have more of that yang problem, in part. But that postmenopausal thing where it would be the matriarchal energy coming through, all the wisdom of the form coming through, the deeply instinctual protective element of the mature feminine as well. Our Western understanding of the feminine as purely the maiden energy, or that which is the flower that emerges, is the beauty and the radiance, which is an important part of it too. But that as opposed to the big tree trunk, like the mother tree in the forest. I just had the thought of, for anyone who's seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, where they go to that swamp and it turns out it's all an extension from this one tree, right? There's all these kind of mysterious, ghostly figures in the forest. It's actually a great metaphor. One good example, and I think I've mentioned this before, of this kind of dark mother energy that is captured really well is through the Oracle character in The Matrix, who, funnily enough, is an AI. But it's great because as they're leading up to meeting the Oracle, the Oracle, she knows everything. And then when Neo meets her, there's a sort of, well, as she says, not quite what you were expecting, right? Because there's this build-up to her being this mysterious, a bit more of a Galadriel type of figure maybe, in this sort of exaggerated archetypal imagery. But then what she is instead is this very grandmotherly figure, and she's got whiskey in one hand, the cigarette in the other hand, and she's baking cookies. And it's very maternal, deeply sensual, and she's even a bit flirtatious, but it doesn't feel like some of these gross things that you see with some older women where they haven't matured into their eros and they're trying to flirt like a 21-year-old. And it's like, oh, it's not right. And it's not that an older woman couldn't be sensual, but that the sensuality has to deepen and mature that direction of eros. And so that's a really good example if you want to go and watch the scenes from The Matrix. I'm sure just about everyone's seen it. You watch the Oracle scenes. That's a transmission that actress Gloria gives through that role. And she's beyond all the drama, right? She really possesses that yin, and it's great that she is a black actress as well, just as a physical metaphor and contrast to the architect who's like the white, like the perfect, you know. And she's got this instinctual, very unperfect, very raw and very, very human dimension to her character. So that's a good example. So this is the thing that we lack in the West. And it's quite the excavation process to dig it back up and to, bring it back into consciousness. I would say any person actually working with consciousness has to really contend with this problem in some way, but certainly women. Bringing this into being, back into consciousness is not a small task. It's a heavy work, and it's really interfacing with all of that which has been stored up in those organs as a result of the generation upon generation upon generation rejection of that instinctual force. When I first started entering my uterus and the sex organs, I had a series of dark mother dreams, and she showed up as the negative shadow of that archetype, which is like the evil witch. And oh my gosh, the most intense nightmares of my life. I'm talking about terror at every cellular part of my body, waking up in sweats. And this evil, really, that's what was there. So that's what that energy had become in my own psyche. So that was many years ago, and so there's been all kinds of things that have gone on with that. It's not necessarily like that for every person. It depends on what the individual feminine lineage is. But yeah, having a really negative mother complex, that was like, oh my God, what's going on down here? So there's a lot down there, fear, terror, shame, a lot of feeling states that we have to be very present with. And if you're a man watching and you're still watching at this stage, good on you. Because this is also relevant for you too. It's part of learning to appreciate, respect, honor these yin processes, and also know that these are processes even for the man which help fashion him, because it's still that collapsing into the dark which allows for the death to happen. Of course, women, if you have conscious women in your lives who are able to live that, they become very supporting and nourishing collaborators in your own individuation process. The feminine principle in that way is that which births the man, just as Cancer births Leo or the Christ child. So it's not just the striving, it's that as well as that, and that interrelationship. So these are all some good things to be thinking about during the month of Cancer. Of course, some of the other standard Cancerian motifs to it: nutrition, health, anything to do with the nourishment of the body. Maybe checking out some good gut bacteria type of stuff. It's all of that which, that's another that we've been talking about in a psychological context, in a metaphysical context, but just at the physiological context, we know a lot more coming out about gut health now. It's a bit buzzwordy, but there's so much truth to it that the gut, what's going on in the gut affects the brain. So even that, so a lot of people are like, what's going wrong up here? But then you tackle it from the belly problem, belly up, and that solves this. So even that is an interesting fractal articulation of that. Okay, I think that was my little rant for today. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think, and if it left you with some points of investigation to experiment with. Okay, friends, see you soon.